Good afternoon, students. Welcome to this presentation on EE31. I'm your tutor for this specific course. The details is on the screen provided to you in terms of contact information. If you need to contact me as a tutor with regard to any of the issues around this specific course, the details are projected. Now, this presentation is for the Diploma in Junior Primary Education around EE31. This presentation is for April 22, August 2022, as well as the November 22 examination. But please keep in mind that this presentation is not an examination scope. It is just a presentation to guide you towards the examinations per se. Now, in terms of the examination format, you will be required to study all the units in the module. You are not required to study one or two, but you are required to study all the units. So which means for the preparation of any examination, you will have to prepare yourself on all the units in your guide. That is the unit on geography, history, as well as biology. It is important also to note that questions for the examination will be selected from all the units in this module. I'm repeating, all the units in the module. For any examination, it is very important that you do review your assignment questions and pay attention to the feedback and the comments received from the tutor markers. What you will notice sometimes, and if you review some of the past assignment and exam papers, you will get an idea of how questions are phrased and what is required by you as a student when you answer these questions. We will talk about that later when we look at some of how these questions are phrased in order for you to understand what is required for you when you answer questions in the examination. Now, some of the aspects related to the assignments and examination for both is actually that you need to read the instructions on the questions, on the question papers. Always answer all the questions, strictly following the numbering of questions in the question paper. Check the allocation for each question. And if not sure about an answer, move on to the next question. You can always go back to unanswered question. I want to stand still a moment here on this specific slide in terms of number one, read the instructions on the question papers. It's important that you read the instructions correctly so that in order for you to answer the questions in each section correctly. And then number four, check allocation of marks for each question. If a question is allocated 10 marks, obviously based on your knowledge and understanding of the question and how you prepared yourself, you should be able to get full marks in terms of the number of marks that is allocated to the question. Even if the question is 10 marks and obviously you only mention answer two answers for the 10-mark question, obviously you will only get 2, which means that obviously somehow you are not well prepared for that question. So it is important that you check the allocation of the marks. The last one is, it's very important that if you are not sure about an answer of a question, just move on to the next one, because if you take too long on a question that you are not certain about, obviously you will lose time. So you will have to manage your time for each question in this question paper. You can always go back to question 1, for example, if you struggled a bit, move on to question 2 and 3, then towards the end of question 1, you can always go back to the first question. You can also download and review past examination papers in order to help you prepare for the exams. It is very helpful, and it gives you an idea of the kind of questions that can be asked and phrased on the different sections of the course. It is important that you familiarize yourself with the course outline and the module. So it means that you will have to read your course outline for each course as well, or the module, so that you can familiarize yourself with each of the objectives of the course and the course outline. Try to read the course outlines with an understanding, comprehending. So if you read, you will be able to comprehend what the course is about, and each unit is about, and what will be discussed in each of the units in order for you to understand the course. If you are not sure, you should always ask for assistance. If you do not need help, if you need help, if you don't understand something, you must always ask. Do not wait until 2 days before the examination starts, then suddenly you want to ask a lot of questions, which you could have asked earlier in the year when you started with the course. Don't wait 2 days before the exam. It is not very helpful. It will obviously lead to a lot of stress, and in most cases, students panic a lot. Aspects related to the course. I've mentioned that there are 3 sections. It is geography, it is history, and biology. This course is combined into 3 subjects. It is important that for each of the subjects you observe the level of questioning, as I've mentioned before, and the different question types, which is also important. Obviously, for each of the sections, for geography, history, and biology, the type of questions in most cases are the same, in a sense that you can be asked to describe, you can be asked to explain, you can be asked to discuss. So it is important that you understand what the question requires by focusing on the keywords, as I've just mentioned. If the key word used in a question for each of the different sections asks you to discuss and explain or name, that is the most important focus of the question. The first keyword is always the most important one. If you are asked to explain, don't mention. If you are asked to discuss, don't list. So those are the differences, because the question is asking you to discuss or explain, and in most cases, a lot of students, they just list instead of explaining. They mention instead of describing, and that is where a lot of students lose marks. Understand what the question requires by focusing on the keywords used in the question, as I've just explained, and then understand what the question requires by focusing on the keywords used in the question. Read questions correctly. If you read the question correctly, you will be able to answer the question correctly. If you read the question wrong or wrongly, you will answer the question wrongly. It is important that you do write neatly, clearly, and consider grammatical correctness, and answer what is required. If you do not answer the questions, you will obviously not be rewarded, meaning you will not get the necessary marks allocated to you as expected. So take these things into consideration. Whether it is for geography, history, or biology, it is important that you do read the questions in the exam paper or in any assignment. Read them correctly. And if you read them correctly, you will be able to answer the questions correctly. There will be a variety of questions in each examination. There will be a variety of questions taken from the different topics in the guide. These questions usually range from identifying, explaining, or definitions, where your understanding of concepts and terms will be tested. In geography, there are terms which you will be tested on. In history, there are terms which you will be tested on. And then in geography, terms that you will be tested on. I'm sure that when you looked at past exam papers and assignments, there's always a question asking you to define or differentiate or explain some of these concepts or terms. For example, in geography, usually you can be asked to explain the concept earthquake or volcano or tectonic plate. This is just to test your understanding of some of the concepts in geography. It can also be a concept on erosion, for example, or a concept on weathering. So those are concepts, and your guide actually gives you an indication of a glossary of concepts with the concept as well as the meaning of these different concepts. So for each of the section, it's important that you do pay attention to concepts as well as the meaning of some of the concepts. To move on, in most cases the questions in EE31 exam papers or the assignments are compulsory, which means that you have to answer all the questions. They range in difference in terms of mark allocated for each question. There will be a variety of compulsory questions of variable mark value, which requires answers of varying length, which means that for a 2-mark question, requires a certain length in terms of the answer. For a 5-mark question, obviously, the length is different, depending whether it is asking you to explain or describe. When you are asked to list or mention, obviously, it is straightforward listing or mentioning. The question will be based on all the units in the module as I have highlighted previously, with the expected learning outcomes for each of the units in the module, which I also mentioned earlier, which is also important. Now, I have mentioned this earlier in terms of how these questions will be structured. It can be structured based on a discuss question. It can ask you to evaluate. It can ask you to describe. You should be able to compare concepts, distinguish between concepts, or differentiate between concepts, meaning what is the difference between an earthquake and a volcano? What is the difference between erosion and weathering? So this question focuses on differences. You should be able to explain what is the difference between two concepts. Another one example, for example, is meiosis and mitosis, the difference. What is the difference between democracy and capitalism? What is the difference between capitalism and socialism? Or it can be a difference asking you to differentiate between democracy and communism. So those are the kind of questions that can be phrased, wanting to know if you know the differences between concepts. Can be asked to mention, like I've mentioned before, identify and state. These are the key words in every question that you should focus on. For example, I've said differentiate between earthquake and a volcano, discuss the strategies to manage the impact or the effects of volcanoes. If I just can get stand still at question number 2, where you have to discuss the strategies to manage. It's important that you should know how should the impact of volcanoes be managed. What are the strategies that needs to be put in place? What students sometimes do is that they confuse strategies with the impacts, where they, instead of stating the strategies that needs to be put in place in order to minimize the impact of volcanoes, they mention, for example, the impacts in terms of, not the impact, yeah, they mention, for example, the advantages of volcanoes instead of the strategies that needs to be managed to manage the impact of volcanoes. You can be asked to mention one human and one natural cause of desertification. This is just an example question where the focus, the key concept, the key focus of this question is mentioned. One human, one natural cause, which means that you have to know what are the causes of desertification, those that are caused by human beings, by us, and those that are caused by the natural world, a natural cause. For example, flooding and climate change is a natural cause. A human cause is where humans, for example, practice farming through overgrazing. That is a human cause, which means that that is actually caused by humans. In all three of the question 1, 2, and 3, in terms of the geography, history, and biology, there's always a question where you are asked to match. This is a matching question, meaning that you look at column A, there's a statement, and then there's a column B which has the answer. So what you need to do now is you have to match the column A, the statement, with the answer in column B. Which is the correct answer in column B that matches with the statement in column A? So you will be asked to choose choose a term from column B and matches the description in column A. Write only the letter A to G next to the question numbers. So this is the kind of question, a matching question, that you can expect. If you look at this question from a different angle, it is actually a definition of concepts also. If you know the definition of condensation, obviously you will find it in column A. If you know the meaning of chemical weathering, you will find it in column A. What usually also happens in a question paper is that we use diagrams or pictures to test your understanding of information in all the different sections of your module, whether it is geography, whether it is biology, or whether it is history. So for geography, for example, you can get, these are the kind of diagrams that can be used. So obviously, test your understanding in terms of what the specific diagrams are, which means that you need to be able to identify and know what these diagrams are and the meaning of these diagrams. What are they used for? These pictures can be used in order to test your understanding in terms of when it comes to weather instruments, for example, on my left-hand side. And then there's a map also, which can be used to test your understanding of certain, of your knowledge on certain issues in geography, like I've just mentioned. The history section, for example, also focus on describing, explaining, distinguishing, or write the full meaning of the following abbreviations out in full. I've explained what is meant by describe. Meaning that if you are describe the successes of the League of Nations, it's important that you describe the successes of the League of Nations. Sometimes students describe the successes of the United Nations. Obviously, that is not what the question asks. The question, even if the question asks you to describe the successes of the United Nations, do not give the successes of the League of Nations because you get confused. There's a difference between the two. Explain the role of the United Nations. The same applies with explain the role of the League of Nations. If you are asked to explain the role of the League of Nations, do not explain the role of the United Nations. Obviously, you will lose marks because that is not what the question is asking you. Distinguish or explain the difference between socialism and capitalism, or imperialism and nationalism. Write the full meaning of the following abbreviations. In history, there's a lot of abbreviations, especially if you look at the ones that I've used here as an example. You can be asked to write out the full abbreviation of NATO, so it means that you need to know what the full abbreviation of NATO stands for. It's also the AOU. I think now it is only the African Union, AU, and then SWAPO and UNTAG. Also pay attention to some of the other abbreviations in the course, especially under the history section, and what they stand for. Another one that I can just mention is SADC, for example. Should be able to know the full meaning of the abbreviation SADC. The same applies in terms of matching questions for history. If you look at this matching question, you will see that you have a column A and a column B. The same principle here applies as with the one that I've just explained in geography. There's a column with the meaning of the concept, which is column A, and then there's the concept itself, meaning that in order for you to match, do the matching, you need to know the meaning of the concepts, and then apply them by giving them a meaning which is in column A. In history, we also like to use what we call pictures and cartoons. I'm sure that you are familiar with this by now, especially in the assignments or from previous exam papers. You will notice that pictures or cartoons are used in history. In most cases, they are very, it looks funny, but it actually describes a certain event that took place in history. So in most cases, it is based on a certain event in history or a topic in history, and what is important for you to remember is that you shouldn't just look at the picture and think that, okay, it's only a picture. It's not only a picture, but you have to look at what are the information that is contained in the cartoon itself, because the information that is in the cartoon gives you, it gives you a clue, if I can put it that way. Then obviously you know that there are clues in the cartoon which explains what the cartoon is about, and which country is the cartoon referring to, or which event is the cartoon referring to. Like I've said, sometimes it's funny, but it shows important events or people. It is important to study the cartoon and then define the illustrated person or event. You can be given a cartoon and ask, there can be a question based on which country or which person is the cartoon representing. So obviously look for the clue in the cartoon, interpret the cartoon. Then you will know what the cartoon is describing. Okay. If I need to go back to this specific slide, the slide also not applies because it's two different subject areas. It also applies to biology. Important to know that the questions can be phrased. You can use the same key verb by asking you to describe, to explain, or to analyze. What we also do in biology, we also ask you to label. I think you have noticed by now in the assignments and previous exam papers, you are asked to label some of the diagrams or pictures. You can also be asked to distinguish or compare concepts like genotype, phenotype, homozygous as well as heterozygous, natural selection, and artificial selection. These are just examples. It is not the examination scope, as I've mentioned, so that you could be able to differentiate between the different concepts. You can be asked to describe the risk of cloning, for example, explain how air pollution can be reduced, explain how water pollution can be reduced. So the important emphasis here is on the type of questions that you can be asked in the exam, where you need to focus on the issues around pollution, whether it is air pollution or water pollution or chemical pollution. Analyze the negative effects of global warming, for example. If you are given a diagram, you can be asked, for example, where on the diagram does each of the following take place? For example, the release of an egg or fertilization. And then an opinion question. Just wanting to see what is your opinion on an issue, for example. Now, if you go to the third bullet, it asks, describe the risk of cloning. Okay? You should know what cloning is about. And then the last question is focusing on your opinion. Do you think? Meaning that now we are testing your thoughts. Do you think that cloning is socially acceptable or not? It's like, is it right or is it wrong? So basically you should be able to have an opinion. If you say that it is socially not acceptable, it means that you are saying it is wrong, so you need to explain why do you say so. If you say that it is socially acceptable, meaning that you are saying it's right, then you need to explain why. The same principle applies here with a matching question in biology. It's a column A, column B, and then you have to match the concept in column B with the meaning in column A. These are examples of pictures and diagrams in testing your understanding of information, fact, or knowledge through labeling. You will see that on most of these pictures or diagrams, it's indicated A, B, C, D, which means that it is labeled A, B, C, D, and you have to know what A is, what B is, as well as what C is. So it's important that you study diagrams as well in order for you to know exactly or to identify them. The same with pictures, testing your understanding. Obviously, both pictures on the presentation here focus on pollution. The one is air pollution and the other one is looking at water pollution. So when you look at these pictures or diagrams, like I've said, you should be able to distinguish between what is the picture on the right illustrating and what is the picture on the left illustrating. Okay, we have come to the end of this presentation. I hope that the presentation would guide you better in terms of preparing yourself for the upcoming exams. So by that, I just want to wish you well for the upcoming exams. The contact details are there for any of you who don't understand a specific question, where you can make contact with the tutor marker or the tutor in order to make it more clearer for you in terms of some of the difficulties you might have around some of the questions and explanations. Thank you.